and welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Caligeras for Pragmatic Institute and your host for this episode. Today, we are joined by Jonathan Evans, an AI product leader with a decade of experience, which is a ton in AI, right? Building disruptive AI products for everything from smart grid platforms to nuclear fusion to search and answer engines. He's worked on early stage products, semi-mature products, highly mature products, B2B and B2C, and everything from early stage startups to medium-sized startups to big tech. So big variety of experience and perspective to bring to the conversation. Today, he works at Google DeepMind, where he is focused on transforming Google Search and Google App with Gemini. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for the introduction. It's been a long time coming. We've been wanting to do this for a while. So I'm happy it's finally happening.
I am excited to have you on. So as you imagine, AI is something that we talk about a lot on the show in lots of different perspectives. But I think what I really like about this conversation is you've got real experience in the trenches in all kinds of different ways. You also have experience with products that many of us use. So I think it's gonna be really good. But first, I kind of gave like the highlights of your background. But if you talk about your origin story, like how did you get into product management and become so passionate about that and AI?
Yeah. So I guess if you're me, it kind of makes sense. So I'll just illustrate from my perspective. So I come from a kind of a traditional French academic background, which basically means hardcore math, hardcore physics, in a Master of Science type of degree. And I had an emphasis on energy and also on applied math. So that's kind of where it all started. And then basically, I was really passionate about energy, and I did, a bit less than a year in venture capital, investing in clean energy companies. And you get through these meetings, and it feels fulfilling for the ego. You're this like 20-ish, 23-year-old talking with CEOs of at that time it was like Solidia Tech and this startup and that startup. So that was pretty interesting. But I quickly realized that I didn't actually want to continue on the investor side, but rather be on the builder side. So that was kind of something I felt at that time. And then what happened was that I quickly understood that in the energy space there was a large likelihood that many of these companies would be dead in 5 years. And so I thought, okay, which ones are the most likely to, exist in 5 years from now? And also the other thing that I cared about was, am I going to basically build skills that are not just energy related, but that I think will be important for the future? And so that's kind of how I ended up on, low CapEx and software and machine learning. So today we say AI. At that time, we still said machine learning. And so I interviewed at a couple of companies, one which at the time was called C3 Energy, which is called today C3 AI and is actually public. And the other one was Autogrid Systems. And Autogrid Systems basically was faster with the process. And so that's how I ended up there. And then for the job itself, basically, so that's how I started in machine learning and AI and software and so on. But then for the product role itself, I realized I liked technical work, but I didn't want to do it all day long. I felt like I was, I had this commercial side to me, this social side to me. And so I wanted something that was more cross-functional, more well-rounded. And so that's kind of how I read the product manager, this job description, and I was just in love with it. And that's what happened.
I think that it's not everyone's story, but it is not uncommon, right? For someone to have an engineering background and just be like, oh, but I want a little of the other side too. Right. And there are some who are like, no, I never, ever want to step foot in that side. But so it's so you kind of, and it seems like, so you've been in a lot of different, you've worn a lot of different hats in a lot of different kinds of companies. And one of the things when we were talking, and we're going to dive deep into your role at Google and AI, but just sort of the perspective of being able to have seen what product management looks like in a 3-person startup and what it looks like at Google, right? And like B2B versus B2C. So I would love just to get your perspective on sort of what is the same when you think of product management in those roles, and then like what is like, ooh, it's really different here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I think that's an interesting question. So I would say, so at AutoGrid, the first startup I joined, we were about 3 in the European office of the startup, which had about 40 people, and basically everybody else was in California in the Bay Area. So we kind of opened, or close to open. I was like the first or second hire basically in that office. After the managing director. I think it was incredibly, intimate. The relationships were extremely strong. You almost felt like they were part of your family. So, I would say, just very, very close. And then when it came to, the product, I think at that stage, I started being basically the product manager for what you call an electricity theft detection tool, basically.
Okay.
And we had about, basically at the time, one big customer, which is called Aon, which is a utility based in Germany, but basically the project was in Romania because that's where a lot of the electricity theft market is. So where you can recuperate basically some of that loss. So I basically had to. Everything was kind of manual, right? Like you had to run your script manually. You were debugging things with your data scientist, etc. At that time, by the way, it wasn't even called machine learning engineer. Actually, it was called data scientist. And so it was very, very, very hands-on. I also had to basically, because for that product I was the PM. I was also the only salesperson. I was the only customer support person. I was the only project management person, right? So, and then I got some of the data scientists' help. So that was kind of like one extreme. Then I think at Planet, we were about 500 when I joined and 700 when we left. And I would say there, just on how do you feel in that environment? I would say the size of the company made you feel the Dunbar number that's at like 150. You start feeling like, okay, you can't have a close relationship with everybody. It starts becoming more political. You have to really do stakeholder management in a different way.
Yeah, more formal.
Exactly, more formal. You have to create more documents for everyone to give their inputs, etc. And that was actually really tough because that's not really my personality. I'm more of so that was quite different. And then on the product itself, I think what was quite different is also the relationship with the engineers. So basically at AutoGrid, if I wanted to make the team more agile, which I thought was really needed to, to be able to build a great product. If I wanted to do that at Planet, there were I think dozens of teams, basically, of engineering teams. Some were on spacecraft engineering and were doing hardware and,
oh wow,
so the telescopes and deciding on basically which bands we would have for the imagery and so on. So I couldn't really put the same things in place in the same way because you were highly dependent on other teams, basically. And then at Google DeepMind. So at Google DeepMind, it's been really when I joined, we were about 1,200, and now we're about 6,000, and it's part of Google. So that's very, very different world. And I would say a lot more specificity, right? You don't touch as much, basically, I would say. And then also, much more stakeholder management and so on. So quite different because so many people own different things for something to make it to, launch ready, right?
Yeah.
There's so many people involved to get it to the quality that you want it to be, basically, for a corporation of that size.
When you talk about specificity at Google too, is it like specificity in terms of product of your role, like you're in a really defined role and it's silent, or
Yeah.
is it specificity in terms of your domain? I mean, Google does so many different things. Is it right? And when you think about that, like, can you feel the size of Google, or is it built in around teams that are more small?
Yeah. So think of it as, so I've been the PM lead for Gemini integration into search on the Google DeepMind side, right? But for one of me, there's maybe dozens of PMs on the other side to make this integration work, because you have UI considerations, you have branding considerations, you have so many different things to make it happen, and especially because in my case, right, the integration is the resulting feature were things like AI overviews and AI mode, which are basically the primary thing Google is known for. So when
no pressure, like don't try and screw that up, Betty. I'm just saying, with the golden goose.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to transforming that is a really interesting. I mean, I think it's a uniquely difficult and interesting problem for a product manager, actually, because in the previous roles, right, it was 0 to 1 or 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. I think here it's 3 billion to 3 billion. How do you change a product that is used by 3 billion people to a product that is used by 3 billion people as well, or potentially more? So it's quite a different problem. And then going back to your specificity question, I think it's more about I'm really bringing the Gemini expertise to the table, the understanding of the capabilities, blended with what makes a compelling experience on search, basically. And then you might have a product manager on the other side that's really focused on a particular vertical, for example, which is could be sports, for example, right? And then you might have a product manager that is focused on certain tools that are used by many verticals and so on. So that's what I mean. Whereas when I was at Planet, I was the modeling PM for the insights product. I owned the product. It was clear. When I was at Autogrid, I owned the theft detection, electricity theft detection product as well, or the demand response optimization management system product. And it was less stakeholders, less people involved, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because it sounds a little bit like, I'm going to use not the probably same language that Google would use, but like you're sort of the product manager for the back end, right?
Yeah.
For for the back end. And then there are other product managers, a lot of them, as it turns out, for the front end pieces. And I think both that's super interesting. And also, I've talked a little bit about this, so I'm excited to dive in. It changes a little bit of the role of you as this product manager, because you're really an R&D product manager, right? You're really back end focused in there versus a traditional role. So tell me a little bit more. Yeah. When you talk about an R&D PM, like how does that work? How is that different? And how do you make sure, and I think this is the crux of the question, that in that part of really being focused on technology, you still have to tie it to the problem, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's maybe tech first to problem. I don't know. But let's talk about that.
Yeah. No, that's a very interesting question. And maybe I'll take time to respond to that one, because I would actually argue there are, if you have the traditional PM role, I would argue that there is an R&D PM role slash modeling PM, and then there's a research PM role that's even more upstream of that, I would say. Traditional PM role, which I've done, where I own some pieces of the UI and so on as well. I think ultimately you're responsible for things end to end. There's a bug in the UI, it's your problem, right? The feature is not designed properly, it's your problem. The API documentation is incorrect. It's your problem. The Jupyter Notebook script
everything's your
doesn't
problem.
work. Everything's your problem, right? So you kind of have this saying, which is all of the responsibility and I think none of the credit, right? So that's basically the traditional product manager role. And then I think R&D is you can start playing with things and having your engineering team, explore things that will not launch at all in the next 6 months, but you will get to a certain milestone. So, for example, you'll prove out that you can improve model quality with this totally new approach, for example, and maybe a launch in 12 months, right? So that I did at Planet. For example, we were working on a change detection product. So basically, you have imagery of the entire Earth every day, and then you want to spot changes in the imagery. So we had one approach to figuring out what were the changes. So where are the new roads? Where are the new buildings? And then we were prototyping another approach, completely in basically not at all in the general code base. It was completely prototyped on the side. And then we were trying to see if that would actually get to a decent result. So that's R&D. And then research PM is what I've been doing at Google DeepMind. And
okay, yeah.
And I would say that actually the role has changed since the LLM revolution, basically. So basically, before the LLM revolution, I would kind of think of it as this 3-step process, which we call internally match, incubate, launch. So the idea is you have an algorithm, right, or a technique, so a machine learning technique that you think has these attributes, right? Let's say, for example, it's a reinforcement learning model or a technique that basically is going to be really good at understanding how to find signals in the short term that will benefit the long term, right? The long-term outcome. So you can think of it as, okay, I'm going to match it with very impactful problems across all of Google. So now comes the question of, Google has, 50 plus products, right? So the question is, what first you start thinking with, trying to narrow down the space of like which products would actually potentially benefit from that. And then you dig deeper, et cetera, and you find basically the kinds of problems that are highly impactful that you think this capability matches, basically, right? And then you have research engineers with whom you prototype. You create a prototype to prove out that this algorithm does indeed leads to a milestone which de-risks its implementation, right, in the future, and de-risk the fact that it will actually solve that particular problem. And then you launch it, and then you pass it on to the product area PMs, right? So that's kind of how it was before.
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go ahead.
Like, because that's super interesting, right? So you've got this technology, the products that are in the portfolio, and you're thinking about where might this technology help solve a problem for that product or within that product. Do you have to, how do you convince the product people that you're I imagine there's not like a convincing, that's not the right word, but there is a process of you can see the opportunity, you build a prototype, but you still need them to see how it's going to work to agree that is a problem we're solving, right? Yeah. So how did that process work?
Yeah, so that's a lot of, understanding. You have to narrow down the space because you won't be able to do that with 50 PAs. So PAs are product areas. So you won't be able to do that with 50 product areas, right? So you have to narrow down the space, and then once you're kind of convinced that it's an area worth exploring, then you start really working with leadership of those product areas to see if this is indeed a problem that is worth solving. And then you work with, product managers who are in their team to actually figure out what would be a plan. And that can take, it can can take a while. Actually, it can take a few months to figure out what is the actual problem that we're going to solve. Because at a high level, it might seem like things will work out, but in reality, the devil's in the details. So that's kind of how we get there. And there is so there's quite a lot of influencing that needs to happen, and you have to speak in their language.
I was going to say you can't go like, let me tell you all about the back end of this, which I mean, again, the other Google PMs are very smart as well, but like there's still a level of depth that you could speak to that is not going to speak to them in the same way.
Exactly. You need to speak in terms of their metrics and what they care about. Although I want to say that things, when I'll get to the second, the new research PM role, that can change a little bit. But yeah, definitely at that time, it was definitely about speaking their languages, speaking in terms of their metrics, and so on. And so an example of that, which I've worked on, is around how do you optimize recommender systems around what we call long-term value, right? So long-term value are things that you actually don't regret having interacted with a particular item that was recommended to you. So think about your YouTube feed, for example, or think of it as notifications that are sent to you. All of these are are all decided by a recommender system, right? And so we had to kind of actually invent new metrics that they hadn't thought of, or we had to modify them to prove out the value, actually.
Oh, so it's not just like, did you click on the recommendation? It's like, did you click on the recommendation? Are you satisfied that you didn't get the value, right? So like there is a whole nother way of looking at it. That's
exactly, yeah. And so, for example, in YouTube, they do surveys, for example, where they ask randomly to get a signal of, do people regret that they've watched this or not? And that comes back into the optimization, and then you can have special approaches to how to optimize specifically for those signals.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's talk post-revolution, post-LLM, right?
Yeah. So post-LLM, so you can kind of think of it as at that time, AI was not at the same level of maturity. And so it was more about algorithms and specific, types of approaches, and so on. And I think in this world today, you have kind of a consolidation that has happened. And, I'm going to oversimplify, but it's much more about there's one model to rule them all, basically, right? Gemini. And so that means that, Gemini has become some sort of a product, basically. And so that it has to be structured just like a product, actually. And so you can think of it as, in this world, it's really about, similarly to, when you build an enterprise SaaS software, right? You have to think about, what are my verticals, what are my horizontals, and so on, and make sure that, the product is thought through from different angles. And so I think in this world, it's, what capabilities do we need? So, for example, do we need someone to focus on factuality, right? So factuality is, how can we reduce hallucinations in those models? How do we think about that? How do we measure that, right? How do we deal with conflicting sentences, or let's say that there are conflicting sources? How do you deal with that, right? Which the web is full of, right? If you do a Google search on, certain topics, for example, one typical example is on a specific monument, right? And you want to know, when was it built? Trust me, many different sources that say many different things, right? So it's more on capabilities, I would say, today, and then it's more also around different product areas as well, and then you also have domains. So, for example, education is a domain; it's not necessarily a capability. And then there's this kind of learning and feedback loop that goes on. That when it makes sense, some domains or capabilities are brought back into the core modeling as capabilities, basically. So that's how it works. Yeah.
Nice. Nice. So you have something that a lot of product people probably both dream about and have nightmares about, right? Because you when you worked with AI summary, right? Again, probably everyone here has used when you do a Google search and you get the little summary at top. So you went from 0 to 1 billion users in less than a year. It was like in front of the whole world. Like everybody is watching Jonathan and what's happening. So like, let's talk about that, right? Like, how did that, first of all, become the problem you wanted to solve? And what was like, how did that process get from, what are we going to do? This is what we're going to do. Oh, it's here.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question. So, I would say so it kind of went through an evolution, right? So at first, when it was talked about, I think it was in May 23 at Google I/O, and it was called the Search Generative Experience, where you basically opted into labs, and then gave you access to this, to this new, this new feature, basically, which was landing on, Google's primary known real estate, which was quite interesting. And obviously, I think the way you have to think about it, in my view, is when you're transforming a product of that size, right? I say internally that the reason why I love this particular, job or this particular area is because we're basically transforming the most complex and used piece of software on planet Earth, and we're transforming it with the most transformational technology. So it's quite, how do you wrap your head around that? I think it's quite fascinating. And so basically, it was basically do launch something on Search Generative Experience. And what's quite interesting is when you're launching in the Search Generative Experience, you're not launching to the 3 billion users. You're launching to a subset of users where you are, just like I did at Planet, you had these early access programs, beta, etc., until you get to GA, right? So in a way, you're doing that as well, and you're controlling the flow of users, and you actually make decisions of how to launch. You make certain decisions on the features and on the product that are intended to learn things, right? Which is quite interesting, right? You're trying to test things, you're trying to learn things, right? And so maybe you might be making things. So that's more on the UI front, but you might be making things more colorful, right? To see if that changes something, right? Then you might want to, for example, allow anybody to give feedback on anything in the on the results page. So any line, basically, you can give a feedback on any line, right? Rather than on the entire response, for example, right? So that we can learn as much as possible. And then from the modeling perspective, similarly, you try to make sure that any feedback that you get, and is you're giving options about specific things that you're looking for when it comes to factuality, so that you can kind of understand, how often are people unhappy about a response because of factuality? How big is the problem? You're trying to measure that, because that's not something that you can actually. That's the thing about generative AI, is that you have to see how it works in the wild to be able to assess, how big some of the problems are. And some problems only happen when you scale enough as well, because that's when everybody is basically playing with the system, and you cannot simulate basically in the lab all of humanity's creativity and so on. So it started with that, and then basically it launched in when we were happy with some of the results, and launched in the US, and then you do live experiments and so on, and then it launched actually in the UK as well, which is where I'm based, which was funny because my phone is still French, so my wife was getting the feature, and I couldn't
Ah,
on my phone, basically, which was interesting. And then she suddenly told me that she had it, which was quite exciting. And then basically ramped up, and I think we are now at the point where it's launched everywhere, actually, including in Europe. Yeah.
how long was it from when you did the sort of May 23 limited edition for the cool kids to like the sort of general release in the US? How long was that?
So the general release in the US, I think, was probably, so the general release was probably 6 months after.
Okay.
It's pretty fast, actually. Yeah. Fast. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting too, and I don't think we always remember this, that part of your philosophy for how you were releasing and what you were releasing wasn't always to say, okay, I think this combination was the best. It was also to say, I think this combination is going to help us learn the most, the fastest.
Exactly. And that's what's interesting also about, generative AI, I would say, and LLMs in general is that you have to take risks to learn, basically. Even now that the product is out, there's still issues with it, but you've hit the threshold where people derive quite a lot of value from it, that it's worth it being there. And then you learn other things. So, for example, just some small UI tweaks, like how you, for certain queries, you highlight the part of the response that's really important. That creates tons of values, because that's actually the model that we've had before when you had citations from particular documents, for example, right? And you can only do these things and see how valuable they are once you've launched them at scale.
Yeah. No, it's super interesting. And I do think one of the beauties of most of Google's products is that they are powerful, but they are very user friendly, right? It works. It works the way you expect it to work, or you're delighted by it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's why I ended up joining. Actually, yeah, it's
right. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, to your point, what an exciting time to be there, right? You're on a product that is already so popularly used. It's already so powerful, and you get to. This is the time when we're folding in even more. And it's also probably interesting because there is, to some degree, a different level of competition in some of their, you hear the conversations about the other GPTs taking over search, that is people's search function now, right? So there is this opportunity, but there's also a different kind of level of competitive pressure than maybe Google had seen for a while.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting environment. There's definitely a lot of choice and a lot of experimentation, in the market. You might even so you talked about ChatGPT, but Claude is also on the heels of ChatGPT, and Perplexity is also on the heels of
absolutely
ChatGPT, and so on. So I think ultimately, maybe I'll share my personal view on this, but I'm not convinced that we have the right interface, the right user experience yet at all for the information seeking, understanding, organizing domain. I think that there's still a lot that needs to be thought through, and what does that actually look like. So I still think it's quite early, but yeah, definitely just because of the power of the capability of these models, there is tremendous interest, and I think Google search recognized that, and I think with AI mode, you kind of have this more conversational approach to it with the follow up, where you can dive deeper, etc. But it's still with the approach of you are grounded in the information that comes from the web, right?
Yeah.
And that maybe brings us to another point, which is I think you should be true to what you're known for and what what is your product known for, basically. It's not that, Google search is not known for the 10 blue links. It's known for solving your information needs and you trusting it, right? That's what it's known for. Right?
It's a really, really, really valid point, right? Using AI to build on your distinctive competencies,
Yes.
right? Like that's the right, not only do you want to solve problems with it, but you want it to amplify what you are and who you are and why you matter, right? And I think that that's an important, in a very important piece. And it is one of the differences if right now, if you like the fact that I get a summary, but the citations, that's not quite the right words, right? But the links to it are right there and very forward. So if it feels, yes, right? And I think is to your point, very on brand. I'm thinking about this too, though, because maybe not as much with AI summary, but a lot of the work you do too, it's interesting because you have this product that you've walked through and you loved and you cared. And more than most product managers, you hand it over to someone else for launch.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's some way there's plenty of product managers out there listening who'd be like, oh, wouldn't that be nice? But also it is a little like, here, please take care of my baby and talk about it the right way and solve it the right way. So how do you come to grips with that? But also, how do you set everyone up for success in that process?
Yeah, that's that's a funny one. So, yeah, I would say I kind of think of myself in a research PM role as I say you're the 6 months to 18 months PM. Whereas a traditional PM is, you can do 2 months. You're lucky if you get to 3 months in the future. And 6 months is what you dream of. Like you dream that you can, think of what's, on your roadmap for 6 months from now.
Yes.
So I think that, the most amazing part is that you have this breadth because you work across products, or within a product, you also work across features, I would say. So that's pretty amazing. And then you're really focused on, like, the expertise is on the modeling side, the capability side, and really thinking through the experience. So in a way, the advantage you have is it's kind of what you've always dreamed of as a PM. Actually, it's you have a mature product, but then because everybody now agrees that this AI is transformational, everybody's willing to ship it front and center. Basically,
that's true.
Then you can, and so you can spend less time on which was more the case, in the first 2 years. My first 2 years at DeepMind, or a year and a half, was so you spend less time on influencing, on the benefits of it, and you spend more time on product sense and what could the experience look like, and so on. And so that's very rewarding, actually. That's really rewarding, also because it doesn't happen. Yeah, it doesn't happen that often, in a career, basically.
Yeah, no, this is a unique,
it's a unique
time in lots of ways. But you're right. Yeah, you would have spent a lot less time being like, don't forget to talk about my thing. Where everyone's like, what you got for me, Jonathan?
Yeah, exactly. But then the PMs on the other side, I think, they handle a lot of the complexities and so on. And I'm thankful for it, to be honest. It's great that, otherwise it wouldn't launch. So it's really a partnership. And sometimes you miss it. You miss being in the weeds on like that side of the aisle, where you have to chop your way through the jungle, and you still launch your thing. So, and that's the partner that does more of that. So that's great. Yeah.
So, curious. I know there's lots of things happen. This is just such an active space too, but I'm curious as to what sort of areas and like what questions that you're seeing around LLM in this new era. Like what are your next things you're excited to solve or tackle?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is, I think you have to build for, because the models are improving so rapidly. So they're improving extremely rapidly in capability. But even if you froze the capability, in 3 months, you get the same capability minus 10%, right? For, a tenth of the cost, right? And that's a very clear trend, right? Smaller models, et cetera, et cetera. So I think one of the things that I keep thinking about is how do I build for the vision, basically, right? So how do I not get locked into a local minima that the capabilities are going to bypass very quickly, basically, right?
Yeah.
So you have to continuously think of that, and whatever you're building you have to keep in mind you're building for the future because costs are going down, etc. And so a good example of that is, if you were to think, oh, costs are going to be stable for the next year, which is what we used to do with computer vision models, convolutional neural nets, etc. At Planet, right? We would just expect the cost to be the same, and so on. Then you will be surprised because those costs are going down, and so the type of application you can build, if your costs are going down, 10x in the next 6 months, and then 10x after that, is very different from the experience you would do if they didn't go down, right?
Yeah.
Because you'd have to limit basically the features. So you'd maybe build for only creators, but not for everyone, right? Just as an example. So those are the kinds. That's an example of something I'm constantly thinking about.
It is interesting because you're sort of building or envisioning without limits, which is not like a little bit of limits, right? Like I think all of it, think like a step, right? You're like, oh, and then but you've got to think so many steps because otherwise you're limiting what you can build based on limitations that simply won't exist soon, right? Not like eventually, but like soon.
Exactly.
And that is that's a super interesting challenge.
Yeah, no, exactly. Look, we are in the era of the intelligent experiences, right? You have to build for intelligent experiences. You're not building for functionality only anymore, right? And so that's what's changed, I would say. And another area that I'm quite excited about is the combination of personalization and agents. So you have this, these models basically now have the ability to use the profile in natural language. By the way, we used to dream about this 3 years ago or something, that you could do things like that. It was like it was on my roadmap at that time, actually, of like we should do more of that, but now it's actually there. So it's this idea of like you have a natural language user profile of Rebecca, for example, and so now think of so you can use that, for example, like think of things like AI overviews, or even from other products like ChatGPT memory or things like that, right? And so you can kind of think of it as you are getting a personalized response because you just don't want to repeat yourself every time, right?
Right. Yeah.
The most basic P0 use case is you just don't want to repeat yourself. You want to know Jonathan has 2 kids, lives there, etc. Okay. But then the question is, okay, given what you know about this person, right? What the AI knows about you, how can they do a better job at taking actions for you in the in the world? So, for example, imagine that you gave it, your natural language professional user profile, right? And then you would want it to go ahead and do, there's been launches in the last few months around deep research, right? Which is actually agentive and, sorts through, hundreds of documents, etc. But it's really focused on your prompt, right? But imagine that now you add personalization and like things that are very specific to you in your workflows, etc. Could it come up with things that are even better, right? Could you improve basically what comes out of this deep research, for example? That's just one example of something that I'm excited about. Yeah.
It's a different level of context, right?
Yes.
It's understanding the context of what then would be interesting to me, what would be priority to me, what would all of those pieces. And then to your point, you add in the agent. So it's not just here's what would be interesting to you, but I can do actions based on that.
Yeah,
that is just a powerful combination.
yeah, and then you can, one word I love is this idea of serendipity, right? So like when I get movies recommended to me, and I use that because everybody knows about that example, is you usually get it through friends and so on. I'm personally not a fan of any movie recommendations I get from recommender systems on any of the platforms, to be honest. Like it's always like it just doesn't get it. So, but you could imagine, yeah, you could imagine something something serendipitous happening much more often, basically, because it really understands you more, basically, right? And it could happen in everything you do. I think that would be a great, actually, benchmark for, is it performing well, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's super interesting because I do think one of sometimes the challenge-ish with AI is that the metrics, the benchmarks, the KPIs that we know whether or not something is successful also needs to change, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like you were talking about, right? It's not just did I click the link, it's am I glad I clicked the link, right?
Yeah.
But all of those things, because the capabilities are more advanced, and the KPIs have to look at it differently. And I'd be interested in that. I mean, I'm sure that's something that you guys think about a lot as well, is what sort of new benchmarks and new metrics should we use to figure out if this AI is really performing how we wanted and how it is, up to some of the possibilities.
Yeah, benchmarks are super important, and I think they come at different levels. So, if you think about Gemini, the core model, basically, the one that is ranked on LMSys dashboard and so on, that's more around, capability type benchmarks, humanity last exam, MMLU, etc. And all of those benchmarks are more around like, are you able to do you have this general capability that we call, math reasoning, right? You have this general capability, or for example, SWE benchmark is, do you have this general capability of solving real world software engineer benchmarks, etc., right? So I think those, by the way, we've seen all of them saturate, and so they have to keep going up and up and up, right?
Yeah.
And actually a good one is even the ARC AGI one from François Chollet is now went to, I think, the second benchmark. So those are also which are made basically to resist LLM, what we call like memorization in a way, or like template matching type of approach. So they're meant to resist that. And so those are kind of like the capability type benchmarks. And then I think you have benchmarks for products, like for an actual product, right? So on Google search, like what's your benchmark, right? So that can be things like factuality, right? That could be things like, factuality, or, like usefulness, basically. How useful is it? And how do you measure usefulness? And I think in a product, I think this is where actually every PM can learn a lot about that, because I think when you're designing something that is quite general, like a Google search, right? Or a Gemini or a ChatGPT, which is basically has this odd, attribute that it's built for everyone, right? Which there are only very few products that are kind of built for everyone, right? Or almost everyone. But you can apply this and actually be, way more, I would say, go way deeper actually than you would go on a general product like this. If you, for example, were trying to build an assistive tool for lawyers, for example, or if you went in a particular vertical, because what you're doing is you're going incredibly deep in the know-how, in the expertise of this particular industry, right? And so then you have to start building benchmarks that are representative of this complexity. And so now you have to think about, how do I find proxy benchmarks for the cognitive process that is going on in someone who's an expert in their domain. And I think that's how people should think about it, because that's what it means to build these like intelligent experiences, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And what a different challenge to your point of, I need something that's great for everybody.
Yeah.
Or I need something that's amazing for this slice.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I mean, like to your point, the benchmarks are different. The expectations are different. This is super interesting. And I also want to ask you too. So you've done a lot of AI products and thinking and work throughout your career. A lot of us don't work at Google, just so you know. Right? Or companies that are, I would say, that have that sort of AI expertise and investment at its core, right?
Yeah.
A lot of us are enterprise software looking to see, how do I build this in? What recommendations, right? From your experience, what would you say to us without some of those extra resources that you have, that as we try to look at how we would put kind of build in AI power to differentiate our solutions?
Yeah. So first I want to say that I don't think any PM that's not in, the frontier labs is at any disadvantage, to be honest, because these models are shipping so fast, that, even I can't keep up, to be honest. So, so if I had to keep up, then I don't know, I wouldn't sleep or something, because it's just the speed of iteration is like really high. So I think you basically, I think the industry is benefiting from this pace of shipping, and there's so much to do already with the models we have today, right? You can already build amazing things. And then I would kind of say maybe three things. So first, use the product to understand the capability, right? So go on, Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, watch a 30-minute video on YouTube that tells you about what are some really cool prompts, etc. Okay, so you get what it's supposed to be doing. Then adapt it to the domain you actually care about, where you have expertise and you can judge the output. Then play with it a little bit, and that can be like a Saturday, and that's it.
Yep,
that's pretty fast. And then you get a sense for, okay, what is actually the capability? So you demystify it, right? And you are the judge of it because you have the expertise in your domain. So that's where you focus on. So that'll give you a sense of what the capabilities actually are. I think then the second point, which I actually said before, is make sure you're true when you think about new product experiences in your product, new product features, AI features. Make sure that you stay true to yourself. That's what you can learn from how Google search has done it. Not so much on how Meta has done it on WhatsApp, which I have my own opinion about. The logo at the bottom, which is I have trouble understanding. Maybe they're optimizing for a different thing, but so I think just stay true to yourself. That would be my recommendation. And then think about like continue the same product process, which is about user empathy, and beyond what they're saying, what is it that they actually need, basically. Right? So don't just listen to what they say, because they might have no idea about what the capability is, and what is it that they actually need. And when I say need, I don't just mean the users, I mean the businesses, right? Like your customer, the businesses, right? And then from there, what can what's a bold bet, basically, of an intelligent experience that would be reimagining or partially reimagining your product that addresses that, and then start making it happen. And you can do that very quickly without any engineers, really. You can do that as a PM and just build it with prompts and see, does it actually do a good job? And then And then from there, it's like, okay, what technique do I need to improve? Do I need automatic prompt optimization? Do I need fine tuning? Do I now need to build kind of an agentic flow, etc. Right, to actually get there. So that would be my suggestion. Yeah.
Excellent. All right, Jonathan, this was amazing. I thank you so much for coming on, sharing your stories, your expertise. It was super fun. I can see all the excitement and all the challenges and all the stuff that you've done, and excited about the stuff you guys are working on now. So thanks for coming on.
It was my pleasure. And we can always do it again whenever you want.
Excellent. All right. That does it for today's episode. Thank you everyone for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.